You know, every now and then I have to spend time just you and me together alone on an issue I think of some importance to put things to rest or to clarify matters. So I've urged my production staff of some 7 members to leave the first hour today alone, which they have acceded to my wishes. In fact, I told them to forget about it. I'm not taking any guests for the first hour. For many, many years now, you and I have been dealing with the birther issue. Donald Trump has crystallized it in his interview yesterday on the Today Show with Meredith Vieira, in which he said he had a doubt whether Obama was legitimately in the office of the presidency because of his lack of evidence that he was born in Hawaii. During the afternoon, 12 to 3, Monday through Friday, I do not think I have dealt with this issue at all, because what I try to do 12 to 3, Monday through Friday, is talk about things germane in the tri-state, Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, Columbus. I talk about the local issues. Then on Sunday night, because I'm on 314 stations, I deal with more national issues, and it's almost always Obama, the president, the budget, or whatever going on. So on Sunday nights, I've had on Philip J. Berg, the attorney, a Democrat from Philadelphia that has sued the president repeatedly. I've had on a guy named Daschle, who's written a book on Obama's roots. I've had on Dr. Jerome Corsi, who's written a book and has another book coming out in May about Obama's birth certificate. I've had on Joseph Farah of WorldNetDaily.com. And from that, I go to factcheck.org, which you're welcome to do. It's a pretty good source for most information. F-A-C-T, check.org, and read other stuff. So I'm going to crystallize for you the controversy involving the birth certificate from an impartial, objective angle, plus the other roots that grow from that tree. In 2007, when Obama was running for the presidency, there began to be suspicions afoot that Obama was not really an American, that he was born in Kenya or Indonesia or God knows where. So the Obama campaign itself sent a letter to the Department of Vital Statistics in Honolulu, Hawaii, Department of Health, to get a certificate to the fact that Obama was born in Honolulu on August the 4th, 1961, or thereabouts. Obama did not sign the release from Honolulu that would allow Honolulu to release the original birth certificate, which is a private record unless released. And to this date, President Obama has not signed that release, which he could easily do, to release his original birth certificate. In reaction to the letter from the Obama campaign, I'm holding in my hand the response that Honolulu sent to Barack H. Obama with his home address in Chicago, which I'm holding right here in my hand. It's right here. And what a clerk did in the Department of Health in Honolulu was to look, I assume, at the original birth certificate and issue something called certification of live birth, taking this information from the original birth certificate. It says that Barack Hussein Obama II is the child's name. It says his date of birth is August the 4th, 1961, born in Honolulu. The mother's maiden name is Stanley Ann Dunham. It says the mother's race is Caucasian. It says the father's race is African. Date filed by the registrar, August the 8th, 1961. Hour of birth, 7:24 p.m. Island of birth, Oahu. Sex is male. County of birth, Honolulu. So when the Obama campaign received this certification of live birth, which is not the birth certificate, they would pass this document out. It's one page. It looks very official. It's on the letterhead of the state of Hawaii to reporters or whoever. Factcheck.org has made a determination that this is correct information as taken from Obama's original birth certificate. As you may know, if you have one or have seen one, if you had a kid recently, an actual birth certificate is signed by a doctor who was a witness to the birth. It has the child's weight and number of inches long on the birth certificate and the hospital in which the child was born. This document does not contain any of that information. So the lawsuits began before the election. I had on lawyers before the election challenging Obama's constitutionality to serve in the office because he's ineligible since there's no proof he was born inside of America. And by the way, Hawaii became a state only about 23 months before Obama's birth. Hawaii became a state in 1959. So lawsuit after lawsuit's been filed. There's been at least 20 to 25 lawsuits filed by various individuals claiming all kinds of things about Obama. Every lawsuit that's been filed has been dismissed by the federal courts before trial. It doesn't get to trial. There's never been a trial on the issue. It's dismissed under something called Rule 12b-6, which is failure to state a claim, or it's dismissed on a standing issue, which means the particular plaintiff doesn't have standing to bring it, or it's dismissed. It hasn't gotten yet to the point of Rule 56, which is a motion for summary judgment. In other words, it is dismissed out of hand by the federal courts as a political issue that they're not going to get involved in. It's been appealed 2 or 3 times all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. They won't take the case. Federal judges would hate taking this case and determining whether or not, in fact, Obama is constitutionally eligible to serve, because it would mean every act that he has committed, every law that he has signed, every judge that he's appointed is invalid. It's void ab initio. So they're not going to do it. Federal judges are going to say, we're not going to get involved in this. The issue is this. Why hasn't Barack Hussein Obama released his original birth certificate, which contains the witness to the birth, the doctor, number of inches he was long, how much he weighed, and what hospital he was born in? There's 2 hospitals in Honolulu in 1961, and neither one will release any records of Obama being born there. So, in a nutshell, that is the controversy. I contend, and I am suspicious. I do not believe and I do not disbelieve. I'm suspicious because Obama has created a legal defense fund and spends now north of $10 million to keep private his birth certificate, which most of us consider to be almost a public record. I have my original birth certificate from Covington, Kentucky. Most of us need it. I needed it to get a Social Security card. I needed it to register for the Selective Service. I may have needed it to get a driver's license, but I'm not sure after the passage of years. But I have an original, and if I need another copy, I can go to Covington and get me a copy of my birth certificate. I don't feel particularly secretive about my birth certificate. It is a public record, but it cannot be publicly disclosed without the permission of the person who was born. Now, that is a branch of the Obama controversy. The most persuasive piece of evidence for me is that on August the 9th, 1961, 5 days after birth, there was a birth announcement in the newspaper of record, the Honolulu Advertiser, which, and I have a copy of that too, that says that Barack H. Obama II was born to Barack Hussein Obama and Stanley Ann Dunham on August the 4th, 1961. That was put in the newspaper 5 days after Obama's birth. Those conspiratorialists claim, and it's possible, that the grandparents of Stanley Ann Dunham, the mother, who was in Honolulu, were proud of the fact that they had a grandson, and they wanted to make a birth announcement. So one of them called the newspaper and said, my daughter just had a baby named Barack Hussein Obama, and we'd like to put it in the newspaper. And the Honolulu Advertiser personnel would say, yes, we accept that as accurate, and we put it in the newspaper. So those who believe it's a conspiracy say he was born in Kenya. And by the way, Obama's maternal grandmother claims that she was present for Obama's birth in Kenya. Accepted or not accepted? According to those on the conspiracy side, that when the parents of the mother discovered that Obama was born in Kenya, they called the newspaper to make a birth announcement. Is that possible? Yeah, it's possible. Is it likely? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But to me, it is not dispositive of the issue that he was born in America because there was a birth announcement made 5 days after his birth, because maybe proud grandparents would call that information into the newspaper and it would be published, and they didn't pick it up from the hospital. Those who believe, like Jeff Henderson, said, well, that's more evidence that he was born in America, because Honolulu Advertiser would pick that up from the hospital itself. That's true, too. If somebody would call the Inquirer now and say, I want to announce the birth of my grandson who was born overseas, for example, would the Inquirer take it? I don't know. It's a birth announcement. You pay a little bit for it. They probably do the business. They take it. The only reason that I'm a little perplexed by this is that I would not spend north of $10 million keeping secret a public document which contains rather innocuous information. Would you? Of course not. All right, here's part two. Assuming he was born in Honolulu on August the 4th, 1961. And if I was a judge sitting in this case, by a preponderance of the evidence, Bill Cunningham would say, yes, he was born in Honolulu on August the 4th, 1961. Not certainly, not beyond a reasonable doubt, but I'd say preponderance of the evidence, yes. Here's another branch of the same tree. And when Obama, and by the way, there's no evidence whatsoever in any public record that Barack Hussein Obama's parents were ever married. There's no record they were ever divorced. This was probably the only president we've ever had, shall we say, that was, I won't use the term illegitimate because kids are never illegitimate, but there's no evidence that his mom and dad were ever married, no evidence his mom and dad were ever divorced. He says they were, but of course he wasn't present either, so it's unlikely they were married because his father was married 5 or 6 times. He was a bigamist, not with the capacity to marry, but that's a different issue. So after the father left and went to Harvard and then went back to Kenya, and he was a drunk and a derelict, much like my own father, that's a different issue. Stanley Ann Dunham, who was a relatively attractive 25-year-old woman, met a guy named Lolo Soetoro, who was a graduate student at the University of Hawaii. They got married, I think they got married in Jakarta. But anyway, he was an Indonesian, he wasn't an American. So at the age of 5, Barack Hussein Obama, our beloved president, as 5 years old, has no control whatsoever over his physical being, right? He goes with his mother and with his stepfather to Jakarta, Indonesia, where he spends the next 5 years of his life, from like kindergarten through the 4th grade. He went to 2 schools in Jakarta. One was a Catholic school, one was a Muslim school. And in both schools, his nationality was listed as Indonesian. Now, he was an Indonesian. This is another branch of the tree, because Lolo Soetoro adopted him to get him into school, because otherwise the public schools in Indonesia at the time did not allow foreigners to come into their public school system. So Lolo Soetoro adopted Barack Hussein Obama, thereby losing his American citizenship, because you can't have, in this country at that time, dual citizenship. So he spent 5 years there. When he was 10 years old, his mother, and no one's really adequately explained this to me, how a mother could do this. His father totally rejected him completely. His mother couldn't stand it anymore, and she shipped her son, the future president at the age of 10, back to Honolulu to live with her mother and father in Honolulu, where he clearly spent the rest of his minority years from the age of 10 till he was 19 years old in Honolulu. There's no evidence and there's no record that he ever reacquired American citizenship when he came back to Honolulu, or whether he lost American citizenship by being adopted and being a national of Indonesia. The story gets a little more hairy when he applies for Occidental College. One of his roommates at Occidental College in California said that he was a Fulbright scholar. To be a J. William Fulbright scholar, you must be a foreign student. Obama has refused permission to Occidental College to release his admission forms, his grades, or anything of that character from Occidental College, which probably contains information that Obama said he was not an American when he went to school there to get a scholarship, claiming Indonesian citizenship. He has not released any of those records. He spends about 2.5 years at Occidental College, transfers to Columbia, not adequately explained. Obama has refused Columbia to release any of his records from Columbia, his admission requests, any grades, any papers. He has them all sealed. He gets to Harvard. No one knows how he paid all these monies. He gets to Harvard. He has not signed any releases at Harvard and law school to release any of his records there. He has also refused to release all of his medical records. He has released, in fact, none, zero, zilch, nada. No medical records of Obama exist in the public domain. He has refused permission in his law firm in Chicago to release any of his records from there. His life is a blank slate because he will not release records that presidential candidates have always released, at least in the last half century. After Kennedy was secreting the information about his Addison's disease, all the other presidential candidates has had to release medical records. He hasn't done it. And so the controversy largely is of Obama's making. By not releasing his original birth certificate and by not allowing his high schools or colleges to release information about him, in the absence of information, conspiracy theories grow, those wanting to make money from this grow, and as a consequence, that's where we are today. Obama has numerous lawsuits pending against him all over the country on the birth certificate issue. He vigorously, with sharp lawyers, defends every one and wins every one, instead of simply releasing his original birth certificate. What I'm holding in my hand here now, the certification of live birth, is not the birth certificate because it is not signed by the doctor who delivered him as a witness to the birth, does not provide the hospital he was born in, and does not provide his size at the point of his birth. And he continues to contest it at every turn. So, let's continue. Thousands on hold, millions and millions are listening. And that is as fair and as accurate a portrayal of the record as I can make. As I've said, by a preponderance of the evidence, I believe he was born on August the 4th, 1961 in Honolulu, Hawaii. Do I believe certainty? No. Preponderance of the evidence. I can prove I was born in Covington, Kentucky on December the 11th, 1947. I have the birth certificate. Probably if I had my producer, Lindsay, I bet she could produce a birth certificate at some point and say, here, if you want to prove it, here it is. But Obama refuses to disclose this information. In the absence of the information, conspiracy theories abound. Bill Cunningham, 700 WLW. Hi, Billy Cunningham. Let's continue now with this and so much more. 749-7000 and pound 700. 1229, the home of the Reds. 700 WLW, Cincinnati. To get the information in front of me called certification of live birth, there had to have been a clerk somewhere in the bowels of the Department of Health in Honolulu, Hawaii, who gleaned this information from the original birth certificate, which puts to rest all this baloney. Friend of Obama's named Neil Abercrombie went to high school with him. Guy became a congressman. A short guy with a beard, same age as Obama. Spent about 20 years in the Congress, ran for the governorship of Hawaii. In October, he gave two or three speeches and interviews and said, you know what? I knew Obama when he was in school. And that no one disputes he was in school in Hawaii after the age of 10. That he said, what I'm going to do, and he said, I knew his mother and I knew his grandparents on his paternal side. I'm sorry, on his maternal side. He said, what I'm going to do when I become the governor, and as a Democrat running for the governorship in Hawaii, that's the nearest best thing to election, I'm going to release his original birth certificate. I'm going to call up Barack and say, Mr. President, I'm going to do this. Do you object? He'll say, no, I'll release it. He gets sworn in January the 4th. About a week later, Governor Abercrombie, this is 3 months ago, of Hawaii, gives an interview and says, yeah, I'm going to release that. Okay? About a month later, a reporter says to the governor again, as governor, are you going to release Obama's birth certificate? He quickly says, no, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to do it. All that does is make the conspiracy theorists go even more crazy, because now they think there's really something to hide. All it would take to resolve all these issues, all it would take to resolve this issue about the birth certificate would be, you know what? I'm going to release the original birth certificate, and this will end it. Why doesn't he do it? Well, what's the reason? What's the motivation? These other matters, such as dual citizenship, He was the son of a British subject from Kenya, or he lost citizenship when he went to Jakarta, where he spent 5 years. His mother rejected him. I never got it. That's terrible. When you're a 10-year-old boy and your mom sends you away because she can't stand you, that's a problem, especially after you've been rejected by your father. Terrible. But nonetheless, no court in this land is ever going to get into the ins and outs. Did Obama lose his citizenship in Indonesia? Did he reapply here? No court's going to deal with that. No court's going to deal with the issue of dual citizenship. That is, he's a son of a British subject in Kenya, and he was a Kenyan because of his birth, and therefore, as an American citizen president, he can't have dual citizenship. No court's going to rule on that. It's a political issue that they're not going to get it. The only thing that ought to resolve this is Obama releasing his original birth certificate that has the hospital he was born, the doctor who witnessed the birth, and also the number of inches long and how much he weighed. I think that puts it to rest. Why won't he sign the release? To me, and it exists. Otherwise, this certification of live birth would have had to have been made up, and I don't believe that. And I'm just perplexed, and it's worthless for Obama's legal defense fund to spend this kind of money defending something that's not worth defending unless there's something to hide. That is so ugly and so crippling to his presidency that he can't continue, such as the fact, according to a roommate in Occidental College in California, he was a Fulbright scholar, which means he claimed he was not an American. Now, that kind of stuff, that would hurt a lot. And no one's going into that issue. No, to my knowledge, it is not discussed with Obama as to why don't you release your educational records, at least from the time you became an adult, as every president candidate has done for 50 years. Why doesn't he do that? He went to a Catholic school in Jakarta and to a Muslim school. He was a dutiful Muslim in Jakarta, Indonesia for those 5 years. And that's not a criticism. It's a fact. When I was 5 years old, I did not have a choice as to which religion I followed. I was a practicing Roman Catholic at St. Xavier Grade School, and that was it. He has written that the sweetest sound in his life is the call to prayers at sunset. That's fine. Embrace it. He is not now a practicing Muslim. He was for 5 years, but he had no choice. A 5 to 10-year-old, I think since then he's become a secular humanist. Doesn't really care about God much at all. He joined Reverend Wright's church in Chicago. Why? Because it was politically expedient to do so. He doesn't practice his religion, and that's okay with me. But just tell the truth. So let's continue now with the American people. Thousands on hold and millions and millions and millions are listening. Don in Winchester, then George and Ken and Ted and Greg and John, a bunch of others. Don, welcome to the Bill Cunningham Show. Don, how are you?
Pretty good. How you doing, buddy?
Good. Go ahead.
But quick thing, you mentioned this a few minutes ago, but by Indonesian law, they don't have dual citizenship. If you are a citizen of another country, two factors: you must renounce any citizenship of them, and you also have to be Muslim. And in the Catholic schools in Indonesia, even though they're Catholic, they also have to teach Islam in the Catholic schools, or they will be kicked out of the country. Everyone, these factors, even if he was born in Hawaii, these factors negate everything else.
Don, everything you said is true. Now, so how, if a boy's 5 to 10, I don't blame him at all for being raised a Muslim and for being in a Muslim school chanting prayers because he had no choice.
That's true. He doesn't, but he does now have a choice as a grown man. And as you said, all the things that he's hiding, including that no one remembers him from Columbia or Harvard, and the Occidental thing, the guy's a bold-faced freaking liar. Forget everything else about him being a communist and Muslim. He's a damn bold-faced liar.
Well, Don, look at it this way. I have spoken with Professor Lawrence Tribe, who's a professor at Harvard.
Yeah, I know he is.
And he had him in class. There are pictures of Obama in class at Harvard. There are classmates in Harvard. There are no classmates in Columbia that remembers him at all. In fact, they had their 25th reunion in 2008, and I had on the guy who was the president of the class of Columbia in 1983 and 2008 was number 25. And at that point, all of them sat around, and there were 75 of them there at that reunion. None of them remember Obama in Columbia at all. And from Occidental College, he had a roommate who said he was a Fulbright scholar, which means he was an Indonesian who came to America. And all that's true, but that doesn't mean a guy who's an American from Hawaii who had spent time in Indonesia may not apply as a foreigner to get free money from Occidental.
Well, that's true that he so he lied to do that.
Well, probably, yeah.
Which is not uncommon.
Yeah,
I'm sure he.
I get that. I mean, that doesn't mean he's not eligible. The fact of the matter is, it's Indonesian law and it's American. Indonesians did not permit dual citizenship. In fact, he traveled to Pakistan in 1981 when he was 20 years old on an Indonesian passport. And so, okay, but see, he can't admit to any of this because it opens up the can of worms to other questions, and he wants that foreclosed, and he wants the media, the government-run media in this country, NBC, ABC, CBS, New York Times, to keep these issues quiet and talk about other matters because it is corrosive of him. But the truth, I don't think, is that bad a deal. When you're 5 to 10 years old, you have no choice on how you're raised, what religion you have, and where you go. So the fact that he was raised as a kid in Indonesia, as a Muslim, and on his applications in school, it says he's an Indonesian, Obama's an Indonesian, is not on him. He didn't have any choice in this matter. And when he came back to America at the age of 10 and was raised, rejected by his own mother, and thrown back into Honolulu, he did not know to reapply for American citizenship, did he? 10-year-old? No, you don't know those things. So, to me, I would like to have the media examine him the way the media examined George Bush's Alabama National Guard service. But it doesn't happen because he's black, he's a liberal, and he's a Democrat, which means you're called a racist if you raise these issues. Well, Chester Arthur in 1882 was charged with having been born in Canada. He had to prove he was born in Vermont. McCain in 08 had to prove he was eligible because he was born in the Panama Canal District from his father and mother, who was an admiral in the Navy. He had to prove that he was eligible. And there was like a mini trial in the U.S. Senate, and they said, okay, you can run for the presidency. How about having Obama judged by the same standards as President Chester Arthur and John McCain? That's all I'm saying. Just treat him like everybody else. Don't pretend because he's black he can't be held to a white standard of behavior. That sounds like the Dayton Police Department, for God's sakes. Treat everybody the same, no matter where you are. And I believe if you run for the presidency, there ought to be like the same application process as when you apply to work at Clear Channel or get a CDL or apply to U.S. Postal Service to be a postal carrier. I mean, the most menial jobs, don't you have an application? You have to prove who you are. There's a criminal background check, maybe a urinalysis, maybe an IQ test or some other testing. How much testing do you have to go through for your job? Whether it's Obama, McCain, Paulini, they don't go through any of that. I think we ought to have a national standard that when you apply to become the president, there's maybe a 10-page application. There's a release of all your medical records, a release of all your educational, proof that you were born inside the country, proof that you're 35 years old, proof you're eligible, an IQ test, maybe take 3 of them, average them out, see how smart you are, urinalysis, see if you're on drugs. Does that make sense to anybody? If you drive a truck, I'd ask my trucker friends, CDL, so what do you have to go through to get a CDL? What do you have to go through to apply to work for the federal government? Same thing to become the president. We do none of that with these guys and girls. We ought to make them do it. You say, you want to become president? Take a couple hours, and we have to find out where you were born, what your grades were like, were you disciplined in school, did you have any criminal record? We got to find that stuff out about you. We don't do that, and that is stupid. Obama is the most unknown president of the last 50 or 60 years, completely unknown. Classmates of his don't remember him. He won't release records. Media doesn't ask him to. He won't. He released an 8.5 by 11 one piece of paper from his doctor saying, I've looked at his medical records and he's healthy. And nobody said, hey, Mr. President, can we look at your medical records? As we looked at McCain's. It was in a room. McCain had a big room. Come in and look at him. And because he was beaten and tortured by the Vietnamese for about 5.5 years. But we don't do that with Obama. Why? Well, because the mainstream media has a narrative and they don't want it disturbed. Let's continue. Billy Cunningham, 700 WOW. Another rather dark and mysterious shell game being played by Obama is that his grandparents in Honolulu were very humble, lived in apartments, had no money. Obama says in his autobiography, he's written 2 of them before the age of 35, that he was a terrible student. He was taking drugs all the time, smoked and drank and did all bunch of stuff and didn't care about schooling at all, didn't care about books. How does a kid with bad grades, with no money, get to Occidental College, which was cost at that point very expensive, and then get to the Ivy League school at Columbia, very expensive, with bad behavior and bad grades, and then get to Harvard Law School? Well, where did the scholarships come from? Where did the money come from to make all this happen? One might ask. I know in my case, I had no money. I worked. And I had scholarships. Basketball at Muskingum College with a guy named Burson. And then at Xavier with my good friend Joe Hawk, whose memorabilia is in Harrison as we speak, Joe Hawk. So certainly it's possible. Yeah, you can do it. People of my age did it all the time. People of Obama's age did it all the time. But I like to know, why will he not release any educational records? Or his driving license records, or his law license records, or his medical history? None of this is ever released, and he refuses to release it. It gives me great suspicion that there might be something there. Let's continue with John in Fairfield, the home of the Indians. And John, welcome to the Bill Cunningham Show. John, how are you?
Very good, Willie. Thank you for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Will, I just wanted to say that you have just put together and laid out one of the best timelines that I've heard on this subject. And, we've been hearing about this for a long time. And, I'm not one that's easily taken in by conspiracy theories and whatnot. When Lou Dobbs came out with it, kind of thought, well, maybe, but it just, and O'Reilly, basically told Lou Dobbs, you're full of it. But the way you laid all this out, and this is the first I've heard about the Fulbright scholarship program.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, I'm still like you. I think you put it best. You don't believe, yet you don't disbelieve. It's suspicion. And this, I cannot believe that this hasn't been looked into by, one Democrat who, might sway a little bit to the right to think, what, do I really want to be associated with a president who, this guy may not even be a U.S. citizen? I mean,
John, what's behind this is, if you're in the Democrat Party, you can't do this because you're a racist, and the heart and soul of the Democrat Party is African Americans who support this guy 95% or more. And if you're not a Democrat and you want to look into this, the media quickly smears you as a nut to shut you up. And Donald Trump, I thought, was a billionaire businessman, pretty bright guy, but as soon as he stepped out with the so-called birther movement, he's now being smeared by everybody in MSNBC and by the national media as a fool when they themselves won't look into it. And I am perplexed. I'm curious. But I'd like to know why he doesn't play by the same rules as everybody else. And to me, it's racism not to say to him, look, you got to play by the same rules as everybody else to get. And, maybe it was irrelevant after he was elected, because it's over with. But the guy wants to be a candidate again next year, and he ought to answer the same questions and release the same information that every candidate releases, and not be judged by different standards because of the color of his skin.
Absolutely, Willie. I agree with you 100%. And one thing last thing I'd like to add is, if you could put that timeline on your blog so that people can see that and print that off. Okay. If you could do that, that would be great.
I'm going to do that because I do not believe, I do not disbelieve. I am curious. I would like the questions answered so we can move on to the substance of the issues facing this country. We got major problems in this country, big problems that are not being addressed at all. These issues should be like an application process. It's done. It's over with. Jeff Henderson, when he takes an application from somebody in the newsroom, demands 10 times the information that we ask of any presidential candidate. Why is that? I'd like to see intelligence test, IQ test. I'd like to see urinalysis. I want a background screen. I'd like to see past criminal history. Release all your adult educational information. I want to know what your driver's license record. I'd like to know the same stuff that the Postal Service requires of a federal employee to become commander-in-chief. Is that so much to ask? Bill Cunningham, 700 WLW.